Hi, I'm Ilene Richard. Welcome to my studio. I am located at the Clock Tower in Pittsfield, and this is my work. I do primarily focus on figurative work, and during this session I'll give you a tour of some of the work that's in the studio. So I work in acrylic on canvas, but I've also done acrylic on paper and also work in some mixed media. Occasionally I'll throw in some things. It's all about the experiment when it comes to being an artist. And sometimes I surprise myself in finding something that will work, non-traditional materials that work really well. Okay, so this painting of this woman here is a painting that I did about in December. We had a large open studios here, and this woman was modeling some clothes for another artist that's on the floor. And I thought that she would be a great person to paint. So she came into my studio and she did some poses for me. And it was a really fun challenge to create her and then try to figure out a background that I thought would accentuate her beautiful color and her pose. And so I ended up playing around with the greens and the kind of tropical flavor behind her, which makes her come forward. This second painting here is actually a painting of my son. We had taken some really fun photos last summer or fall, and for some reason this one just resonated with me. I loved his animated expression, his animated hands, and I also felt that it was going to work really well in this format, this size format, which I do have a tendency of working large. I very rarely will do these portraitures on a small scale. I just love this kind of in-your-face kind of presentation. And when they're all hanging in a room, in one room, it makes it even more dynamic. So this is so totally him, but also adding a different type of background, making it look like he's obviously outside, near shrubbery, on the grass, and for me, he feels like he's speaking to the viewer who's coming and looking at him. So this painting here is obviously very different in style, in the way it's stylized, as opposed to the other paintings, which are more photo referenced. These paintings are all come out of my head. I create the whole idea. What I've always been focused in on is the idea of groups of people together, and that interaction of people together, and the kind of a split-second moment in which you take a photograph, and so they're each having, they look differently, they have a different sensibility about themselves. This one I did not put hands in because I felt that the design structure of this painting with these lines coming up help bring you back to their faces and go across. So there's sort of a design element here that is just bringing you around and around. The other thing in some of these paintings that I also have done is I add some rhinestone to give it a little bit of a bling factor. So when the light hits it, hanging on a wall, it gives it a really fun texture. And so again, my interaction with people going out, young women going out together as a group, going to a bar, going to a club. And these are the things that I've done in a lot of my paintings. Painting up here, it's the title of it is called Why Not Me? It's also the whole idea of women out in social settings. I'm sure a lot of women can relate to the fact that their friends are out talking to other people, and they're sitting there looking beautiful, but not necessarily getting the kind of men that they want to attract. And so it was sort of that was sort of the feeling that I wanted to get. At the time that I painted this, my daughter was in her 20s, and I think that was also an inspiration for me. Not that was necessarily happening to her, but it was sort of the idea of kind of reminiscing of what it was like for me also to be going out with friends and being, not having that social interaction like they were having. This particular painting is called Table for Three. It's, I also, as you can see, I've added a man into this painting, which I do men often, but this one just sort of wanted to have a playful effect where they're wearing costumes, they're out and about. It could be a period piece. It could be something that was that they were out and about in the 20s and the 30s. I love doing textures. I love doing patterns. One of the things that's really exciting to me is to play with the patterns and watch them kind of work together, as a grouping, as a painting. The other one about this thing, too, is also experimentation with the color. Putting this kind of pink background is not something that I do normally, but I thought that for some reason, once I put it on the canvas, it seemed to work really well with bringing these three figures together. This painting up here is called Best Friends Forever. So it's another depiction of three women going out, looking provocative, but not necessarily, unacceptable. I try to, push the boundaries on that. The one thing about this one is it's a mixed media piece. It's not just straight acrylic. I did go back in it and use pencil over it. There is some spray paint over this. There is some newspaper on the top that I also put on here. And their hair was actually created by using a lot of old paint. And then painting over that a little bit more to give this that really interesting texture. Because as an artist, every material that we use can be reused. And so I try to limit waste as best as possible and see what we can do. This diptych, which is a two-part piece, one of the challenges that I actually put upon myself is to see if I could create multiple images on a very long and narrow format. So I wanted to see if I could pull it off doing the figures that I do. This is a depiction of people in what they used to do in the 20s. It was called, these are dance clubs back in the 20s. And I was depicting, the women would get a little ticket, and they would find the guy, and then they would dance with them. And that's what this is a depiction of. The color palette in this one is obviously very much more muted than a lot of my other work. That was also the experimentation phase that I wanted to do too, where I wanted to change my color palette and work with a limited color palette. I also added gold leaf on these behind them to give them a little bit of a shine. Also because of what they were doing as a depiction, because I think there would be a lot of lights and shine behind them. And this piece, I should actually go back and do some more of things like this. But it's interesting how we just kind of go off and do different things. This painting is called Reflections of Rockport. The initial painting, the start of this painting was done up at a workshop up in Rockport, Massachusetts, at the Rockport Art Association and Museum. And I also, like I said, I wanted to do another portraiture piece because I wanted to show the group that this was, a kind of a fun thing to do. But also, what's interesting about this piece is not only is it focused photo reference, but there's also a graphic quality to this painting too. So it's a good example of kind of melding both of my styles together in one painting, the flatness and the three-dimensional effects. So in her glasses is a reflection of actually Rockport, which is where I was staying. I took a photograph of my daughter's reflective glasses, and I painted the scene that was coming through in her glasses. This is a painting of my mother that I did 3 years ago. It's called Unfinished at 94, which I thought was very appropriate. So when I was painting her basically her face and all of her clothing, even holding the mug, is exactly what the photograph looked like. However, when I was painting it, I felt like it needed something to give it a little bit more, interest. And so I ended up finding a hat that I thought would, that suited her face and the coloration and everything. And I put it on her. And then the background, the wallpaper, is kind of a reminiscent kind of wallpaper that she would have seen in the 40s, which is another thing. I wanted to have kind of an age relationship between her and also her history. And this floral wallpaper was something that you would have seen. But all of the jewelry and all of the things are all my mother. My mother loves to get dressed and with all her bling. And it was one of the things that I did that was very, very interesting thing to do. I just felt it was time that I wanted to do a portrait of my mother, because after all these years, I'd never wanted to do that. And I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, and it was just such a lovely photograph. And I said, let me take a picture. And I'm just very grateful that I did take the time to do this, because it really means a lot. Fortunately, my mother's still around, and she is 97 now, and she still is blingy as she is, she is in this painting. And I have to say, this particular painting has gotten into a lot of some very, very tough juried shows. So I'm very honored by the fact that they love the painting of my mother. So this is a painting. I do a lot of animal paintings. This painting was something I wanted to do because my husband and I were fortunate enough to get to go to Africa, and we saw a lot of giraffes. And so I had some photographs that I wanted to take, or that I took, that I wanted to see if I could paint. I was very amazed on how interesting a giraffe's head is in this process, how triangular it is, and just a really fun, the colorations, the background. I mean, I was so proud of myself that I actually was able to capture this the way they are. So this is another collection. I do believe in doing collections because I'm an artist that feels that just doing one painting in a grouping, it doesn't necessarily represent me. So I always feel that it's important as an artist to do a collection so that you can see it as, it kind of feed off each other as a grouping. So this is one out of 5 other paintings that I did of insects, the ladybugs, because they're so prevalent in Pittsfield. But I've also done ants, flies, bees, and other insects. And it's just fun to see the beauty in these insects, in the creatures, the colorations and the shapes. So before I was even doing a lot of these paintings, I've been a children's book illustrator for like 30 plus years, and I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of major publishers. And this is one of the books that were done. This is published by Pelican Publishing, and it's called 10 Hungry Turkeys. And it's a very funny story about a group of turkeys that get invited to go to lunch. And as the day goes on, as they're walking towards their destination of having lunch, one of them will drop out and say, "I'm just not sure if this is a good idea." And so I tried to create some kind of funny depictions of them freaking out about the idea of going to lunch. And all the other ones are very calm. So there's a lot of really, really fun pages of turkeys. So one of my favorite things, as is also in my paintings, I love creating character development. I love making individual characters stand on their own, whether it's their outfits or their mannerisms or whatever it is that separates them from the others, which is also, this grouping concept is what's very prevalent in a lot of my work. So the book on my right hand is a book that I did for Golden Books, which is, I think, owned by Random House. It was the writer is a scientist who wrote a whole series for children, and it was a really fun. It's still in the market. You can still find it on Amazon. It's also been translated in a German version as well, so which is really kind of fun. But there's some really, it was a really fun story about a father and son who go on a mystery, and learn about shipwrecks. So this shipwreck fever. This book is one of a couple that I did for Grosset and Dunlap many years ago. It's actually a picture book. I mean, it's a paper doll book, but it's done in a way that is, very different, because the clothes would actually go over their head, so you'd have to cut it out and put their head over it. So one of the difficult things for me as the artist who was doing this was I had to create all the clothing to go over these paper dolls and to make sure that they would fit perfectly. And so that was not only as an illustrator, drawing these pictures, but you also have to be an engineer to make sure that they all fit. So so all of these clothes were designed by me. I had an inspiration to, paint certain things, create certain things. And this has also been in the market. This was published, I think, in 2001. So this is still out there on Amazon. This painting is called Tiger Cat. I think one of the strong points of this particular painting is the layout, the composition, where there's parts of her body that are off the canvas, and yet it still works as a whole. So my thing is playing with composition, because I don't think that you always have to put everything in there for the viewer to understand that it's a woman laying on a sofa. The cat, the added cat, I just needed something for her to feel like it's more than just her. I needed to put a cat in there. I do that very often. But here again, it's also the combination of patterns and colors that you wouldn't necessarily think would work together successfully, but I've made them work. I decided to play around with different facial expressions. The painting is called Tell Me What You Really Think. And it was also the idea of putting together multiple faces in one painting and trying to get it to work so that it would not be too much and still keep it interesting for the viewers. I love the diversity of the people that are in here, from an older age to a child to someone with pigtails. It's just really was a really fun experiment for me. Like I said, I keep using the word experiment because, again, I still stand behind the fact that every time I do one of these things, it is an experiment. And again, I go back to my roots of doing the patterns, putting the patterns together, facial expressions, the glasses, all of these different elements that make it really fun and playful. So it's something that also, people could consider having like a family portrait done like this. It would be kind of fun to have in your house. This piece is obviously there's no figures in this one. It's, again, nice to experiment with different ideas. Sometimes I get tired of doing the same things, and so this one was a play on a still life. There was not a setup still life in this one. I did not have vases sitting in front of me to paint. This is all out of my head. And the elements that develop in this thing is just when the painting needs more things to make it interesting. So this one has a lot of texture built up on it that I used, all kinds of things. Again, finding things, mesh, paper, sand. I think I also put some sand on this. And, it's a piece that's really as interesting close up as it is far away, which I think is another part that's really important in work, is that work should be as interesting when you look at it close up to understand or figure out what did this artist do. And the birds I added later on because I felt that it needed another layer of interest, and the birds came in after the fact. So this is a painting that's a work in progress. I mean, I started this just, I think, yesterday. I do sketch out my work. And then it's just the idea, it's like a sculptor. It's like keep molding the face, the eye, whatever it is, and I keep going back and back into it to get the exact image. It does take a lot of time. As you can see, I put a lot of black line in here because I wasn't crazy about the way it was looking, but that will disappear because I'm not going to keep that like that. I and I put the hands in because like I said, another element in my work. What's going to be interesting about this piece is the fact that he's wearing glasses. He's wearing this, a loop, because he does very small, tedious work. And I think it will be very interesting when this thing gets finished, but it's definitely going to take some time to get there. Oh, thanks for coming to visit me at my studio. Hopefully you can make it over at the Clock Tower sometime, but if not, you can check me out on my websites. I have two. It's Ilene Richard, ILENE, Richard.com, or it's IleneRichard.faso, FASO.com.